I'll ask a rhetorical question because I don't have any way of seeing any hands go up, but how many of you have considered writing your own obituary? Well, thank you again for the wonderful invitation to spend some time at your great expo. I hope you don't mind that I played a little bit with some of the wording here in Ancestor's Death. We normally think of death as weeping, and I like to think of it in the context of finding our family stories as reaping. We know that how important individuals are in our lives and how personally painful it is when people that we know and love pass on. For us as family historians, though, as researchers, we know how very important it is to find the records associated with our ancestors passing. And so they really can become kind of interesting, if not happy and joyful times for us, as odd as that sounds. I've always maintained you can tell a genealogist, you can tell a family historian when they get excited about going to cemeteries. They get excited about finding wills and codicils to wills and guardianship papers and probate packets and all those things. So we're going to take a kind of a quick paced march through probably a lot of things that you already know. But maybe this is a refresher and a commitment to be more thorough than we typically are, because there is a lot of information that we can find. At an ancestor's death, as the slide shows, the potential for record generation is among the highest when an ancestor dies. There are other times in an ancestor's life where events and what that ancestor did generates records, but the record generation potential is almost never as high as it is when the person passes. And why is that? For the two reasons that are on your screen. Driven by, we need to take care of the person. I mean, literally take care of this body and everything associated with the person, like announcing to mourners, letting creditors know, hey, if you think you're going to collect on something, now's the time to make sure you get a piece of the estate. We need to pay attention to local codes and laws and regulations that govern what we do with dead people and how we bury them, etc. And that's different across the world. And then we have to take care of the person's property. So just those two general activities can create an immense number of records. And of course, as researchers, we know that those records don't always jive. They don't always say the same thing. So sometimes we might get frustrated saying, gee, why should I need so many records? Why should I look for so many records when some of the information will conflict? It's always better to have the biggest context possible. So you can always tell, again, a genealogist or a family historian by where they spend their free time, like in cemeteries, looking at tombstones and plots. And there's so much that we can learn from context. So we'll take a merry little march. I have 4 sons. They're all young men now. When they were little, though, they used to love going to cemeteries with him because we talk about where the headstone is placed, where the footstone is placed, and what all the iconography means. And it was kind of funny. Their classmates in grade school and middle school always kind of like bummed out, freaked out about cemeteries. And my boys were like, yeah, we have great times in the cemeteries. And really do. So the first thing, which we've always seen, I'm going to harken back to the presentation I made last hour about us being thorough and analyzing. So this is less than the 2-column inch obituary for my wife's grandmother. And you can skim through that quickly. Born Bryan, Ohio, lived in Fort Wayne, homemaker, survived by her 2 daughters, burial in Linwood Cemetery, died at the Lutheran home, memorials to Calvary Presbyterian Church. We might say, well, gosh, it doesn't tell me her parents. It doesn't really tell me much other information about her, but look at the clues that it does give us. She died in an institution, Lutheran home. So we can write to a private institution like the Lutheran home and see if there are any records. Oftentimes private institutions will not share their records, but you know they won't share their records if they're never asked. So will they share anything with you? Will they share the log of the visitors that came to see her? will they share anything? We know that her husband Glenn preceded her in death in 1982. Is it the same place? Didn't say, but we can look for that. We know her age at death and place of birth. We know her 2 daughters, the funeral home, the cemetery, the church affiliation, and an organizational affiliation. What church do you think she belonged to as you look at that? Last sentence there, memorials to Calvary Presbyterian Church, but yet she was in the Lutheran home. What's her denomination? Well, just a tiny, tiny bit of sleuthing. Lutheran home, find out who they accept. They accept everybody. Memorials to Calvary Presbyterian Church. Why would you do a memorial to a church? You just go to the phone book, pick any church down the street. No, there's usually some other family affinity to that. So here's my grandfather's obituary from Jasper, Indiana. Much more robust obituary. You see the little arrow markers. This is a typical mid-20th century obituary in the United States. Now, there are regional differences oftentimes in obituary. First paragraph tells you how he died. Second paragraph, typical of the time, how he became ill and what was his illness like. So he became ill visiting his daughter and son-in-law, Buffalo, New York. Third paragraph, third arrow on the left. Oh my goodness. Valentine Witcher was born Huntingburg, Indiana. Tells you his parents, including his mother's maiden name. Up on the right-hand side, tells you where he worked. Next paragraph, who he survived by. The body is at, the second to the last paragraph, the body is at Betcher and Sons Mortuary. The Oblates of St. Benedict will recite the office of the dead. Good Baptist organization, right? Oblates of St. Benedict. Now, anytime you see an Oblates of a society like that, it kind of screams Catholic. And if that wasn't enough to set you off, they will recite the rosary. That's about as Catholic as you can get. So funeral services, where they're going to be held, where the person's going to be buried. Look at all this information. It's what I call actionable data. What we now know that we can act upon. Residence, employment, illness, wife, surviving siblings, funeral home, church affiliation, 2 associated religious groups. I know it's a terrible photograph, but I just had to use this obituary because it's kind of funny. I probably won't have time to share all the humor with you, but this person is a typical small town obituary for early in the 20th century. This is 1911. And so, again, you have these robust sections where it tells you about the person who died, and then their church affiliation, marital state, how they entered marriage, when the person died, continuing on. This is about 7 column inches, which is a pretty robust obituary. You start picking up on these. She leaves not only to mourn her departure, but to bless her sacred memory. All this flowery stuff. The humor in this, which I won't really have time to share with you, is that this paints this individual, which is one of my wife's family. I can say that because she's probably not listening. One of my wife's family, and it paints this person as some sweet, angelic person. And OMG, during her life, not so much, but where she lived in Fort Wayne, who the Reverend was, where the interment's going to be. On the right-hand side, Mrs. Bowen mastered the art of making friends and keeping them. Wow. That's a lot of liberty taken with that obituary. I only point that out, 1, because it's humorous, and 2, because we as historical detectives, as researchers, need to weigh and prove and find what's right. Love this bottom paragraph. The following out-of-town people attended the funeral. Why would people come from out of town to attend a funeral? Because they were bored? Because they didn't have anything else to do that day? Well, unlikely. Possible, but unlikely. These are people that are related somehow. Related either by blood, family relations, or ethnically related, or religiously related, or some other network or circle that may be important for us to know that. So I know you've all seen obituaries forever. Take a closer look if you don't do that on a regular basis. This one real quick obituary, this is again about maybe 5 to 6 column inches. The smaller the community, the more likely the obituary will contain a robust amount of information. This gentleman, real nice gentleman, I knew him, I met him. He got front page. He got a front page obituary in 5 to 6 column inches because he was the county historian. And some of you might say, academically appropriate. Who cares? Big deal. Well, that's right. It's not a big deal. No credentialing. He liked history. He was a county historian. But what that got him was post office box number 1 in Hartford City, and it got him 5 column inches of an obituary. So really important. This is a Roman Catholic weekly publication. So these are all people that died in Catholic churches in this area of the United States, northern Indiana. And you look for tips everywhere you can find them. So this person who lived in a villa, she's being buried at Saints Peter and Paul in Duluth, Minnesota. Why is this Fort Wayne person being buried in Duluth, Minnesota? You're going to hate me for this question. What's the real answer? We don't know. But it's worthy of exploration, right? Why is this Fort Wayne, Indiana person being buried in Duluth, Minnesota? Because she always liked Duluth. She has bought a plot there one year. There's probably some consequential reason. So we look for all the announcements of death. This evangelical messenger, a volunteer of ours, spent 10 years indexing 160,000 obituaries. And all these are posted online along with the index. They're pretty short obituaries, but they are chock full of information. So Sister Hannah Struck, niece, so it tells you her maiden name, consort of the late Andrew Struck, mother-in-law of Brother Charles Schmoll. So a lot of family in that first little section. Another obituary here. Look for all of these clues. I have the square along the bottom of the obituary, conducted by Reverend Sully of the Baptist Church. Remember, these are evangelicals. So the funeral was conducted by a Baptist minister, assisted by a Lutheran minister, as well as a Methodist Episcopal minister. Why are all these ministers for this person's funeral? You know the answer to that question. We don't know. But boy, is that good fodder for us to explore. So leave no stone unturned. Obituaries can be really rich sources of information. I got this out of a Los Angeles newspaper when I was speaking out there years ago. Kept it ever since. Absolutely nobody. This is absolutely nobody's obituary. Died when he was 37. Absolutely nobody actually received 7% of the vote in a general election. So you just never know what you're going to find in obituaries. Look for other ways and other records that may have announced a person's death. So sometimes in ledgers of funeral homes, they talk about when they received a body, when the person died, and when they picked it up. February 2nd, 1938, picked up the body at 8:20. Govin and Sons Funeral Home, there's the mortician undertaker. Notice this little side note here. Sandbar Cemetery, Jefferson Chapel, Whitley County. Govin and Sons is a county away, but they made a note here about where this body was eventually buried. So look for clues everywhere. If we're fortunate enough to have family documents, look for clues in family documents, such as Bible records in the family record pages between the Old and New Testament, but also on the fly sheets, the empty pages in the front and the back. People write things everywhere. So we find a lot of death information. We all know, don't we, about being critical about handwriting to see different styles of handwriting, different ink. Was it all written at the same time? So they're more information of remembering, records of remembering. Or are they written at different times like this? Different penmanship would argue that they're probably written at different times, maybe closer to the time of the event, which means maybe, not always, but maybe more accurate. Just more examples of the death sections in Bibles. So as we're worried about taking care of announcing the person's death so mourners can come mourn and creditors can come see about getting made whole, there's the task of tending to the body. I know it sounds a little silly to some people. I know when I talk to middle schoolers and high schoolers about this, it's like, oh yeah, you got to take care of the body. Ooh, isn't that kind of spooky? Well, spooky or not, funeral homes are businesses, and businesses keep records. And most of their records have to do with who's paying. So sometimes when you're looking at a funeral home index, you won't find the person you think you're going to find because you're looking for the deceased. There are a lot of indexes that pick up the deceased as well, but you'll notice all the headings here on this page. The principal party, that's not the deceased. That's the person who's paying. And here's another example. So Herman Krusky, coffin for a child, and how much is owed. for all of that and how much is paid and still due. Same funeral home years later in 1897. The main person up here, James Spalding, he's not the deceased. The deceased is way down here in the bottom right-hand corner. Martha, she's the deceased. He's important because he's paying the bill. So yeah, he's got the money. There's the deceased. Just to tell you how quirky I am, I'm excited about the pallbearers. I'm really excited about the pallbearers. Why would I be excited about the pallbearers? So Martha Spalding died. Presumably her husband, James Spalding, is taking care of her. What are the surnames of the pallbearers? There's not a single Spalding among them. Why am I kind of excited about that? Kind of excited about that because who are the pallbearers? Family members, neighbors, church people. So those surnames, if I do a little bit of extra research, sort of nearby research or fans research, friends, associates, and neighbors, I may find some family relations in here or records that will lead me to other relations. That's how critical we need to be as family history detectives, as people looking to find all the information we possibly can. So I'm always excited, if they were all Spaldings, it was like, okay, they're family members, let me sort that out, but they're not all Spaldings. None of them are. So there might be some clues there. Sometimes if we didn't have another clue at the bottom of the page that said Catholic cemetery, we can look up the Reverend in the city directory if we didn't know the denomination of the church and find it that way. So just one sheet of information can give us a lot of data, a lot of what I call actionable data. Organizations, historical, genealogical, patriotic organizations all over the world have indexed their mortuary undertaker records. And this is just an example of an index. Whenever you find a secondary source like an index, we know that people are perfect, right? Transcribers, indexers, people who put things online, it's always perfect, like never. So when you see a transcription like this, if you can get back to the actual undertaker, mortuary, funeral home record, that's always preferred, but this is actionable item. We can find things in family records, in mortuary records, funeral cards, memorial cards, homegoing programs, relatives and friends that came to visit. I want to share with you just quickly, and time always goes so fast. I get excited about sharing information with you. So this is my maternal grandmother. And so I'll tell you a quick couple things about Tilly. Tilly was born dirt poor. My mother grew up in a slum in southern Indiana. My mother's still alive, so don't tell her I shared this with you, but her mother could outdo any sailor in the drinking and cussing department. She smoked and she drank when women in North America didn't smoke and drink. And you have to ask yourself, how does this very poor woman who, went to church when she had to and someone drug her to church, how does she get not one but two priests at her funeral? Oftentimes more clergy will show up the richer the person is because they've made contributions at various churches. How does this poor German, Tilly Englert, English German, get two priests? And it's this kind of attention to detail that all of us family historians and researchers should have. Father Michael Allen is the pastor of St. Joseph Catholic Church in Jasper, Indiana. That makes sense. Father John Hall. Who the heck is Father John Hall and why is he there? Well, a little bit of sleuthing. Father John Hall is the pastor of Holy Spirit Church one county over in Orange County, Indiana. And you say, who cares? Well, Tilly died in a nursing home in Orange County, Indiana, in French Lick. Why did she go to that nursing home? Because there were none in Jasper, none in DuBois County? No, because that's where her youngest daughter lived. So taking little clues like this, you can begin to put the puzzle pieces together. Sometimes you'll be amazed at what you find. Many funeral home directories in North America and the United States are called National Yellow Book, but there are many other directories. And increasingly, these directories are online. Sometimes you have to pay a fee to get online. So try to find out where you can get the cheapest and best access to them. Other things as we're taking care of the body, casket makers, casket companies. This is a register of caskets. So the deceased, the place, district, county, date of death, the name of the purchaser, and the post office box or address. Here's another register of funerals that is kept by a casket maker. How do you know that? Because over here it says coffin or casket size. So you can find things everywhere. Notice all the notes that are written in here as my cursor is going down the page. Sometimes almost nonsense notes, but 2 miles west of town. So, okay, that's a little bit of information. Some street addresses. Over here you have COL period. So in the United States, that typically stands for colored, African American. So you don't find too many of those on this page. And again, that can be a clue if that's your particular family person. So look for everything. This is a published work, but County Armagh, Ireland, this is a cabinet maker who apprenticed with a particular person in Annapolis, Maryland. He made furniture and coffins. And in the list, and again, we'd like to go back to the original source if we could, here are the people that he made coffins for. Notice the number of children. Sometimes we forget the number of children and mothers who died in childbirth. So all kinds of information everywhere. Bringing the loved one home, as I say at the top of that slide. If you're transferring a body anywhere around most countries, you need some kind of permission, some kind of certificate, some kind of approval to do that. So here's a transit label. Permit to bury. The cemetery says, do you have a right to open up this plot? Who are you? How are you related to the person who purchased the plot? So look for information everywhere. Church burial registers. Sometimes they can be really disappointing. This is a church burial register for a Fort Wayne church. Notice all these blank spots here. But notice this one entry here. Theodore Zeus, member of our Zion Lutheran Church, El Paso, Texas. It's like a half a continent away from Fort Wayne, Indiana. If you don't look at this church record, you may not know about that relationship. So leave no stone unturned. You can tell that I am sorely and sadly afflicted as a family historian, as a family history detective. When we could travel, and I spoke around the country in many places, if I had a plane layover and I had a really nice host, would we go like to the mall and shop? No. Would we go to a theater and watch a movie? No. I had like an 8-hour layover in Phoenix one time. And I had this wonderful host who took me to 2 huge cemeteries. That's what us sadly afflicted people do. So a lot of cemeteries have had people walk the cemetery and record information. Again, if you can get back to the actual cemetery, I prefer this kind of an index to this kind of an index. This one's in alphabetical order, so you lose proximity. This one has an index in the back, but this one is in order as if you're walking around. What are the 3 most important things in real estate? Location, location, location. Those 3 things are important in cemetery real estate. Make sure you know why they're buried where they're at. Is it a family plot? Is it a church plot? A lot of individuals, again, have indexed cemetery records, transcribed the business records. So this was part of my a second trip to Arizona where I had a host who took me to some Tucson cemeteries. Oh my goodness. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of information on this, but has his birth and death dates, but native of Scotland. A Jewish burial. Chinese burial. Some burials around here. I know this sounds maybe a little silly, but as good historical detectives, we can leave no stone unturned. So one of the obvious questions, I think it's obvious, why is there a train on this tombstone? Could be a whole host of reasons, but we're pretty sure there is a business. So maybe he's a model trainer. Maybe he worked on the train. Maybe he was a conductor, a fireman, a brakeman, a porter. Who knows? But clues that are left for us, we need to explore those clues. So on any tombstone, really zero in on all of the imagery, all of the iconography, because it will give you clues and hints. Another Tucson Arizona stone. If we had more time, we would go through this. There are actually lines where my cursor is going down. Very hard to read, but we would turn this to a negative image. It's in Spanish, but this is an entire family on this tombstone. Wouldn't you love to have a tombstone like that? Now, this doesn't look like much. This is here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's the Brackenridge plot. You have to be a little careful in looking at this, but every stone you see in here where my cursor is moving, all that's not the same design, obviously, but it's the same family plot. We're going to race through this. So this is Frances, wife of this Robert Brackenridge, and Charles Starr Brackenridge. What's Starr? Probably a carried over surname from a previous generation. Here's another Robert Brackenridge. Here's Helen McCarthy, first wife of John Brackenridge. It means she was married again. We can just go on and on. George Harrison Brackenridge. All these people are in the family plot. I know this two ways. How do I know this two ways? One, I can see the stones, and two, I can look at the sexton's records in the cemetery office and see, yes, these people are all part of this plot. And things that I always encourage people to do, look for current evidence of people visiting that grave. This is from a number of years ago, like 26 years ago when I took this picture. But at that time, there was a young child named Adam who came and left a wooden cross saying, "Poppy, I love you," on this stone. If this was left in 2020, I'd really be interested in knowing who Adam is and what is his relationship to this person. I don't know about New Zealand, and I apologize for that. In North America, both Canada and the United States, we do some crazy things over here. People have been known to put contact information, an email address, or a phone number, a cell number, in a Ziploc bag and a 2-penny roofing nail, and put that nail like right about here in front of the headstone for a person who's coming to visit to see that they also are interested in the stone. So yeah, we do crazy things. Evidence that someone else has been tending this stone. We're all familiar with names of children, marriage dates, etc. Someone is planting a flag here. In North America, usually that's a sign of military service. Not always, usually. Nice poems and verses. Here at Horace's gravestone, we have the Brotherhood of Locomotive Firemen and Engine Men, so working on the railroad. He too had a train. Look at the information on here, this person and their lodge number. Look for information everywhere, including lodge or fraternal organization information. Sometimes at the base of the tombstone, there's the monument company, or in the days of yesteryear, the stone carver. Some military information, air service, more information there. This is over in Columbus, Ohio. This was the camp that kept Confederate soldiers from the South during the United States Civil War in the 1861 through 65 time period. You know, as a good student of history, these are all Confederate gravestones. How do we know that? Because they were pointed, and the Confederates did that on purpose. They were pointed so that no damn Yankee Union soldier would come sit on their grave. Honest to goodness. So being really knowledgeable, pays dividends. And here in this military cemetery from a POW camp is a civilian and other burials. Here's stone carver at the bottom. Mount Calvary Cemetery over in Columbus, Ohio. The families may have a plot, but the cemetery is organized by church. It's a Catholic cemetery, and people are buried in church plots, sometimes in family plots in the church plot. So just knowing that, you already have some actionable items. If someone was buried out of a church, maybe they were married and baptized, and maybe their parents and grandparents the same. So you know all the verses to that tune. Here's a mother, father, and grandmother, all in the same plot. So I love the extra attention to tombstones. So here's a person who fought Eli in the Civil War. There's his wife, but under her indicates who she's the daughter of. More information about family members on the side of of this tombstone. As the top of the slide says, take care to really be thorough about reading tombstones, but I would also add, please don't damage them with chemicals, etc. Our smart devices, our smartphones, these things, these are amazing, absolutely amazing. You can take a pretty high-res picture, get it on your computer, use some photo software, you can lighten and darken the background, you can make a negative. It's amazing what you can do without ever touching the stone or putting things like shaving cream and other toxic things on the stone. I thought you would enjoy this stone. There's stupid and there's I'm with stupid. That's a real place, but I think the meaningful information is really on the front of the stone, but you have to really admire people with a sense of humor. And this is another one. Ma loves Pa. Pa loves women. Ma caught Paul with two in swimming. Here lies Pa. Don't know whether that's true or not, but if we were related to Lewis Cook, we'd probably say, well, I need to explore that. Great book for North America. I think some of the tombstone iconography is more universal than just North America, but Stories in Stone really talks about fraternal organizations, tombstone iconography, symbolism, etc. Really helpful. And I thought you'd enjoy this comic from yesteryear, Beetle Bailey. Some families actually laid their plots out like this. No, they really didn't. But the point being, pay attention to where people are buried. Just like real estate, same with cemeteries. Location, location, location. A lot of directories in print and online of countries. This is print cemeteries of the United States. Online list of cemeteries in New Zealand, South Africa cemeteries on Family Search. You can find burial sites in many, many, many different places. So we've sort of taken care of, tended to the body. Now we need to start attending to what I call official or legal matters. It didn't happen at the beginning of every jurisdiction, like the founding of a town or the founding of a county or the founding of a parish. Typically didn't require recording of deaths immediately then. But whenever they started requiring the recording of death, so Indiana became a state, just as an example, in 1816. They did not require recording of births or deaths until 1882, and they didn't enforce it until 1903. So you're thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, for most of the time my ancestors were here, there's no official vital records. That's right. That's why obituaries, that's why burial is so important, because it helps build the story. But where we have ancestors dying during a time period where official recording was mandated, it can be pretty robust. So we're just going to quickly go left to right across this ledger page. So here's the date of death in 1909, date of birth, name, our marital status, and then father's name, mother's name, certificate of death. Disposing of property has to do with a lot of things that people don't like to read because it's handwriting. Some of these wills and probate packets, increasingly so, have been transcribed. For North America, Ancestry and Family Search have partnered on a probate project. I believe Family Search is also doing the same thing for the British Isles. I'm not sure of that, and I think Find My Past may be looking at that, if not already engaged in that as well. But look for the wills. Many people died without a will, so then look for the probates. Look for both of them. And yes, struggle with the handwriting, because it's probably not going to look like handwriting that you've seen, but it's worth taking a look at for all the reasons that you'd expect. Family members being named, property being located where you wouldn't have ever thought property was owned by the particular decedent. So just amazing amounts of information, and it helps tell the story of the family. I can't tell you how many people will just pass by a will or a probate packet because it's in handwriting, and I'll wait till someone else does that. It's like, well, you could be waiting like a couple lifetimes. So just a lot of information. Look for the codicils where the will has been amended. Look for wills that are in deeds and land records. Look for the settling of the estate. So when the estate is being settled, an amazing amount of information is contained in these records. Even for people that were not that well off, There's just, if we had the time, we could play with deciphering all of this wonderful handwriting. Appraisals and inventory. Now, I have run into more genealogists who skip this than I have who actually look at it. But if we pause for a moment and think, why do we do this? Why are we in pursuit of dead people? Why do we do this? Because we're passionate about finding our family story. And oh my goodness, what is a better way of finding out what our ancestors' life was like than looking at the estate inventory? The livestock, the cooking accoutrements, the farming accoutrements, everything that's listed in the inventory tells us something about that person's life. Will that necessarily help us get back one generation further? Probably not directly, and it'll probably be a stretch indirectly, but it will tell us more about their life, which I think will help us find their ancestors. So often we kind of leapfrog through the generations, pick up just enough information to go back one more generation. Well, pretty soon, to continue the analogy, we find ourselves without a lily pad. We've skipped over so much data, we don't really know where to go. So inventories, love looking through inventories. It's like, oh, wow, I wonder what this is. As you would as a good historical detective, leave no term undefined. If you have an interesting looking, what you believe to be a cooking utensil or a farming implement, find out what it is. That might tell you a little bit about their life. So the widow's part of the evaluation, just amazing amounts of information. In many communities, this is fairly recent, meaning this isn't back in the 19th and 18th century, well, not in the 18th century. Coroner's inquest, if someone dies of unnatural causes, not always, but often there's a coroner's inquest. And I know you'd all be proud of this ancestor. This is from Missouri's transcribed coroner's inquest. Cause of death, run over by train while intoxicated. Well, there you go. There's an ancestor to be proud of. But at least you know what happened to this particular individual. There are all kinds of other categories of what I call extra records. How do we find these? Focus on the geographic area, the events of the time, occupation, religion. Those can give us clues. So if the person was in the military, did they ask for and receive a headstone for any military engagement? Here's a set of records from the National Archives of the United States where people who fought in the Civil War on the Union side, on the federal government side, requested and got tombstones. And so it gives you some military information and it tells you where the stone is going to be placed. That's a little bit of extra information. Not everyone gets that. For the more rich and famous, and I have none of these people in my family, I'm not sure I lose a lot of sleep over that. It is what it is. But if you can find a funeral oration, they're just chock full of information about the person's life. Like that one obituary I showed you of my in-law, who wasn't necessarily such a nice and wonderful person. These are pretty flowery as well. These people are saints, saints on earth. We just didn't know it, but they're saints. But we can comb through all of that fluff and we can get to the stuff, the facts. There's a couple of great online sites, the Association of Gravestone Studies. I kind of moused over that to show you what they provide on their site. I'm sure most of you have heard of a number of these websites, World Gen Web, Genealogy Societies, Library Societies, but Find a Grave, which is part of the Ancestry family of databases. Amazing, worldwide, someone who, their tombstone in Scotland, the cemetery. A lot of people don't know as much about billion graves. Which one do you search? The answer is yes, search them both. Billion Graves has a different, I call it a protocol, where if you have a smart device and you download their free app, you take a picture of a tombstone or a monument, it will attach the GPS coordinates to that. So the next person that comes, they can go right to that particular stone, no matter where it is in the world. And this is a tombstone from South Africa. So just all kinds of places that we can find information. So my last slide, the end of an ancestor's life, I like to say it's where research begins. Oftentimes we run into our ancestors later in their life. just a couple of what you might call whimsical things, but I'm pretty serious about them. So first point, we're losing a lot of cemeteries worldwide because of the environment. One, how long the tombstones have been around, the acid rain that's heavier in some places than others. So I would just encourage all of us, if we care about local history and care about preserving records for other families, we all have smart devices, or most all of us do. If you're in a cemetery looking for your family, check out Find a Grave or Billion Graves and see if there are tombstones that you might add to that. Because I believe in another 100 years, a pretty consequential percentage of our cemetery tombstones won't be viable, won't be able to be read, even if they're around. So sorry to put an extra duty or burden on you on this wonderful Saturday morning. Secondly, and I hope this doesn't sound as morbid as it might, I'll ask a rhetorical question because I don't have any way of seeing any hands go up, but how many of you have considered writing your own obituary? The reason why I ask is sometimes we might be able to leave a better trail for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren than our own children or our own nephews and nieces, whoever gets stuck writing our obituary. It's kind of interesting, and what brings that to mind is, one, newspapers are starting to charge more for obituaries, at least in North America, and I think in other places as well. So those might go away. So obituaries might only exist on family sites. And why not share as robust of information about yourself as you're comfortable? Because those might be the way that the majority of obituaries happen in the second half of the 21st century. We just don't know. I hope that we aren't as casual as we might be about preserving our own stories. And what brings that to mind is my father-in-law, he is in the Picture Dictionary of Life under grandfather. He's definition number 1. He was a super grandfather for our 4 boys. So who gets to talk to the funeral home for his obituary? My brother-in-law. And he got his birthplace wrong. He got my son's grandfather's birthplace wrong. So maybe we want to make sure that our obituaries are a little more accurate. But thank you so much for your time this Saturday morning.